Hi, Jake from Real Robots here. Today we're going to start on the graphical part of our graphical user interface. Continuing from where we left off in the last lesson, first thing we're going to do is make a new tab, and we're going to put our input object here. So far we've just been grabbing information over serial, but now it's time to put it in a nice object to make it easier for us to handle. So we'll make a class called input. And I'm going to give it an index integer, which we'll use later on for controlling where the buttons will appear on the GUI. So all the actual data will be held in these scrollable lists, which is an object from the Control P5 library for processing, which is what we'll be using to generate our GUI. So I'm going to have one for the pin, one for the input val, and one for the input type. So a scrollable list is actually a controller, which will give us a drop-down list from which we can choose options. So you can see the scrollable list doesn't exist yet, so let's make a new tab for our UI. And I'm going to import that Control P5 library I mentioned right now. If you don't have it, you can just go to Import Library, add a library, and in the search for Control P5, and there it is right there, a GUI library to build custom user interfaces for processing. I'm also going to import the Java utils library that has some arrays I want to use later. And there's my Control P5 object, and we'll call that UI. So that will be basically our whole canvas, and we apply all our buttons to that. I'll put a function here to initialize the UI and that UI object. Now you can see how our scrollable lists work now. They're contained in the Control P5 library. Let's make my constructor, and the only thing we need to feed it for now is the index. That's just so it knows if it's the first button, second button, third button, and where it should appear on the screen. It will help us for naming as well, because Control P5 actually names everything with a string name. So just putting in now setters for my variables there. So I'm going to make a function which returns a scrollable list, and we'll just make a basic scrollable list which will cover us for each of our three lists we're going to add. Scrollable list, I just call it SL, and UI.add scrollable list, so we're adding it to the UI right now, but we'll also be keeping a reference to the object in the input class itself. And so this string list type, it's of course list type is an integer, I have to convert it to a string, and when I go concatenate the index, that'll all be part of the string as well. That's just a requirement of Control P5. We're going to set the position. So you'll notice I haven't put a semicolon at the end. All the additional functions here are all still part of setting up our scrollable list. Now I'm just putting in some figures here just to control where these buttons will appear. So the first index will be the first list type will be the pin, which will appear more to the left of the screen. The second one, input val, a bit more to the middle, and the final one, input type, to the right. And the index tells it how far on the y-axis it should be. So I'll set the size. The add items I'll add later. That's the array of options. Set it to not be open at the moment, and the value to 0. So the initial string array I'll put in will just be a list of pins, which I'll just make to be an array list, which will go 0 to 1024. And that's just so we actually have at the start numbers we can put in. Of course, later on we'll want other options, like whether it's a keyboard key, a mouse key, and we'll want to have all the different keyboard keys in the drop-down, but for now we'll just put them all on this pin list. So just doing a loop there, 0 to 1024. So my pin list will have 1024 objects in there. And then just return the object at the end of our class, or function I should say. So that's it. Now when we create an input, it will automatically create 3 scrollable lists, and it will add them to the GUI as well. So this size will set the actual GUI size in pixels. So we'll do 640 by 480, and we'll initialize the UI now. Let's test that out. And you can see I get this 640 by 480 box, and it keeps putting it on my other screen, so I'll be dragging it over every time it seems. So I'm going to add an array list of inputs. So this will hold all our inputs. Now I'm using an array list because I can add and remove from it as much as I like, as opposed to my Arduino array, which is a fixed size at the start. And let's just do a test. I'm going to add an input to our list now and just see how she works. And you'll see I put the index of 0 in there. And there we go. We've got some lovely drop downs. But it looks like we've got an issue with them. They're not actually dropping up again. You can see these ones I haven't selected, but after I select them, they don't retract. Now the reason is the way the processing works is it draws everything on the screen, and then it draws it again, then it draws it again, then it draws it again. So if we don't draw something over the top, it's never being erased. So we're drawing this here now, but when I click it and it's closed, it is gone, but it's still, it hasn't been erased yet. We need to draw the background back over it again. So now at the start of every frame, we'll redraw the background. And let's see how she works now. You can see there, we close it, and the background is being drawn over the top once it's gone now. That's more like it. So let's delete that tester. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to check if our packet label count is 0. That means we've just received our first packet, and that's the time to add the new input object. So right now the input size is 0, so we can get a nice index of 0 for this guy. And then rather than just printing these packet labels, we're going to get them. So I'm getting my input at that current index, setting the value of packet label count, which will be 0 at the moment, to the value of in byte, which is the byte we've just received. So we should get 3 packet label counts, 0, then 1, then 2, which correspond to our pin, input val, and input type. And now let's make the function, which will grab those and assign them correctly. So set val, int variable, and int value. And what I want to do to make this simple, I'm just going to grab our 3 scrollable lists and put them in an array. Pin, input val, and input type. Then I can grab that var as the index and assign the value to it. Nice and simple. Now, of course, it's not equals. I have to do it the way the scrollable lists work, which is .set value, and then set the value there. Good. So after that, the value should be set correctly in our scrollable list. The one thing we've got to do is actually send the request for the config, and rather than pressing G like we were before, let's transfer that into a request config class, function I should say, a request config function. It'll still work when we press G, but let's also just run it as we start up. Save me pressing G every time. And let's see how she went. There we go. We've got 2 sets for our 2 inputs, and the numbers seem to be all set correctly. So now we have drop-down lists we can use to easily change the numbers. Now you can see the draw order is off. So what we're going to do is write a little function, because we put them in one at a time starting at the top. The one at the top is actually behind the others. So we need to just add a function to bring those 3 to the front. And then we'll add a little function that will be called every frame called draw UI. And what we'll do is here we'll just count through our inputs backwards. And just reset the draw order, telling them to be drawn in the front, but starting at the bottom. So then the top one will be on top. So when we use its drop-down list, it'll be over the others. Now we don't really need to call that every frame. We'll probably fix that later, but we'll just leave it here for now. And you can see now, oh, it's not being drawn on the top. And that's because our draw UI call is never actually called. So let's go over to our main draw function and call it from there. So it'll be called every frame now, which is 60 frames a second, as long as your computer can keep up. There we go, that one draws nicely. And this one now draws over the top. It's still a bit weird because they're all the same color, but at least we can actually press those now without the other one getting in the way. Okay, next, none of these buttons are labeled, so I'm just going to add some text labels. So I'll set the text size to 10. We'll count through our inputs, and this will let us put a label along the left. So to draw text is just text. The text we're going to put in will be input, and then the current index. And of course, I worked out these numbers earlier. So each one is iterated by 15 pixels. And you can see now, input 0, input 1. And then let's label our columns. So we'll label the pin column, the input value column, and the input type column. That worked nicely. They're probably a bit small though. So for this one, let's just increase the text size a little bit. Beautiful. So it's basic, but functional for now. Now what I'm going to do is add some more buttons. So we'll have one to remove inputs. So we just set the position. And that's all we need. And we'll add another one to add inputs. Now that string name is quite important because that's how we will reference these later on. Oh, not quite right. I might just switch those positions a little bit. And you'll see when I create a function called add input, same as the name of the button, that will actually be called when I press the button. So those names are quite important. Of course, it also controls the label that goes on the button. So when I push one, we'll just add a new input to the inputs list. And when we press the remove button, we'll just remove the last one from the list. And let's see how that works. Great. Adding them works really well. See, everything works just fine. But removing them, it takes away the variable, but the actual GUI objects, those scroll lists, are not being removed. So if you recall, they were actually added to the UI itself. They're not taken away when we take away the list. So let's just grab the input that we're deleting and let's make a function called clear. Then we'll go into our clear object and we'll just make a function which will go through and actually delete each of those objects. So UI.remove, and then we need to get that string name, so it's just pin.getName, and for each one, input val getName and input type getName. So we can add, and they work, and we can remove. Excellent. And the one last thing we need to do is have a button to actually send the new packet and apply our new settings to our Arduino controller. So we'll call it update. We'll make a function for it. But I think we will save that for the next lesson. So this is dragging on a little bit. We're nearly there though. The upload button is there, it works. Now we just have to work out how to take those numbers and send them back. We've got numbers coming to us and populating our data here. Now we need to go the other way. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.